The speed and the scale to which the world has developed COVID-19 vaccines has been unprecedented. The old systems were not equipped to handle this, so new systems were created, including the COVAX facility. And with these new systems, there was a need to look at financing in an innovative way to ensure vaccines reached countries in need. Yet, even with this innovation, the world has faced vast inequalities in access to COVID-19 vaccines as high-income countries stockpile these doses and fail to deliver on pledges. In response, there's been a lot of conversations around building stronger systems and the right infrastructure to ensure future access to vaccines to low and middle-income countries through means such as boosting manufacturing capacity. So a key element in building these stronger systems is financing, and it must come in the right forms, amounts, and in the presence of strong partnerships. My name is Sara Jerving, and I'm a global health reporter with Devex. Today, we are speaking with two experts who will walk through some of the financing structures that have helped and can continue to work to help low and middle income countries in the future to have better access to vaccines. So I'm joined by Nafisa Jiwani, who is Managing Director of Health Initiatives at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which is America's development bank. There, she provides leadership on policy and transactional matters on global health, and she spearheads DFC's Health and Prosperity Initiative, which seeks to mobilize capital to strengthen health systems and improve resiliency. She formerly worked as team lead manager in policy and partnerships at the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I'm also joined by Michael Anderson, who is Chief Executive Officer of MedAccess, which is a social finance company with a mission to make healthcare more affordable and accessible for people living in underserved communities. There, Michael leads on strategy, partnerships, and delivery. He formerly served as Director General at the UK Department for International Development and has served at the Prime Minister's Special Envoy on the Sustainable Development Goals and on the UN Commission for Life-Saving Commodities. Thank you so much for joining us both. So to start us off, Nafisa, in September, DFC announced it would provide $383 million in political risk insurance, which is one of the conditions for self-financing countries to obtain COVID-19 vaccines from Gavi, which is the Vaccines Alliance. Can you talk about what role this insurance plays? What are the terms around it and how countries access it? And have you had any challenges so far in rolling this out?
It's a great question. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with Devex and, of course, to be on a panel with Michael Anderson. It's always lovely to work with him. Maybe I would start off with just a little bit of background around just the global health financing gap prior to the pandemic, and then talk a little bit about the project with Gavi. There is a $370 billion financing gap for global health prior to the pandemic. And if you think about just Africa alone, the financing gap was $66 billion. So our health systems and vaccine manufacturing in particular was weak before, and you're definitely seeing the challenges of that today. DFC remains committed to increasing access, including access to vaccines. And I think the work that people like Michael have been doing for quite some time really is an opportunity for the DFIs to say, how can we also contribute to increasing equitable access to critically needed medicines, including vaccines. So the project with Gavi really allows for us to provide political risk insurance, which is designed to mitigate the risk of doing business in emerging markets. For DFC, this is, prior to transitioning from the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, for DFC, this is our bread and butter. Our bread and butter really is debt financing and political risk insurance. Political risk insurance being one of the first tools that OPIC developed back 50 years ago. So it's an area that we really know well. With political risk insurance from DFC, Gavi is mitigating its risk exposure to 9 countries, which will allow Gavi to secure a great number of vaccines for allocation to all countries participating in COVAX facilities. So it's really just been an incredible opportunity to work with not only Gavi, but with Citibank as well.
Great, thank you. And Michael, over the past year, supply has been the key issue hindering access to COVID-19 vaccines rather than funding, but but that will change in the future. So can you talk a bit about the future of financing for COVID-19 vaccines and what that might look like when the COVAX facility advanced market commitment funds are depleted?
Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Nafisa, for the kind words. It's a pleasure to be here. This really is a generation-defining event for all of us. The world has faced this enormous logistical science crisis, which is linked to a big challenge on funding. And as Nafisa pointed out, there was an enormous funding gap for global health well before COVID. And so now we're getting to a position where we had an emergency response. The COVAX and AVAT, the African Vaccines Acquisition Trust, were set up as emergency vehicles to pool together funding and procurement to meet an immediate need. But going forward, we're going to have to get back to more business as usual. So that's a challenge. Looking at the medium term, there are four main streams of funding that we want to look at. One is there will be some concessional financing that will continue through pooled procurement mechanisms like Gavi and AVAT. And there will continue to be concessional funding for those, which will be vaccine specific. That's really important. Second, there's going to be funding for the multilateral banks. We can talk some more about that. In particular, the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, which have provided big pots of money for this, bringing forward concessional finance. Third, there's going to be domestic resource mobilization, which is private payers, but also tax gathering in country and national budgets, which are going to be under really severe strain because of the fiscal pressures arising from the economic crisis generated by COVID. That's going to be a real challenge for some time. And then fourth, there will be a stream of donations from some bilateral donors. There's been quite a lot of controversy lately about how those donations should be priced and what impact the donations may have on future development of manufacturing capacity and so on. We can talk a bit about that. But those I see are the four main streams. No matter how we cut it, there's going to continue to be financial pressure all around. And the World Bank, for example, bringing forward their $8 billion in IDA funding for vaccines is a promissory note that will have to be paid off in the future. It's not free money. And that put additional pressure on global health financing. So we're going to see a transition to business as usual. I think the kinds of co-financing that Gavi have done in the past, that's one path that we're likely to see more and more of. But the last thing I will say, Sara, on this front is that exactly how much we're going to need in the way of financing for the next few years is still unclear. We still don't know about the future path of the virus. We know, according to the UNICEF recent report, that 17.1 billion doses have been contracted by September 2021. And the WHO is aiming for 70% coverage by the middle of next year. But exactly how many booster doses are going to be needed, how much coverage is going to be needed, whether there'll be new variants, all of those things are uncertainties, and we're going to have to be flexible and responsive as those new challenges emerge.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the African Union's acquisition of vaccines for countries to purchase, the first deal that they had was with Johnson & Johnson. It was for manufacturing vaccines partially produced at the Aspen facility in South Africa. And Nafisa, DFC announced a financing package with a series of other partners for 600 million euros to support this pharmaceutical manufacturer in South Africa, Aspen Pharmaceutical. Can you talk a bit about how that financing is structured and what it's supporting?
Sure. So maybe a few things. One is that what we're seeing right now is history in the making. And you're starting to see this decentralization of vaccine manufacturing where I think prior to this pandemic, you saw a lot of manufacturing happening in the US and Europe and in India. And now you're starting to see opportunities for contract manufacturing organizations to partner with pharmaceutical and biotech companies to secure vaccine manufacturing in their own regions. And alongside with that, you'll see a shift in terms of what's required across the value chain for vaccine manufacturing. This project in Aspen Really has been a pleasure to work with other DFIs. We've worked with the IFC, with Proparco and DEG. And I just recently came back from visiting Aspen PharmaCare, and it was really just incredible to see the work that's being done there and the mid to long-term strategic approach that the company is taking to ensure sustainability of not only this project, but other opportunities to decentralize vaccine manufacturing, to bring manufacturing to Africa. I think one of the challenges that we are seeing right now, and I think that the world is seeing, is that specifically on the continent of Africa, 99% of the vaccines are imported. And so here is the opportunity for us to change the story, to change the rhetoric. And so a project like Aspen, where we're working with other DFIs on a syndicate loan to provide working capital and long-term debt, is incredible for Aspen, but really it's a strategic partnership that I think that is most important in this relationship with Aspen. It's not just the financing. The financing is one piece, and to be able to secure long-term competitive rates is one piece, but to have strategic partnerships with, DEG, Proparco, IFC, and DFC, I think is really the important piece here, and us thinking about sustainability of this transaction, because their success is our success. So how do we look at, aside from COVID-19 vaccines, which are critical right now, what does the mid to long term look like? And this is where I think our conversation really is right now.
And how did that partnership come together? How did you know who were the right partners for this?
Sure. Well, a few things. One, I think that several of us, right out of, the pandemic starting in March, started to think about what is the role that a DFI should be playing in this space. And many of us around March and June put out call for proposals to say we want to be able to leverage our financing tools, whether that's debt financing, political risk insurance, equity, funds to funds for DFC, and similarly for other DFIs as well. How do we leverage these tools in a way that we haven't seen before? And so with that sort of call to the private sector, we started to develop relationships with institutions that I think for many DFIs that we haven't built before. And so working with IFC and with others who have, I think, like-minded way of thinking about how to tackle the pandemic, IFC was able to, coordinate the syndicate loan. We work really closely with them on this project and with others. And I think you're starting to see this collaborative effort across several DFIs. So this project is 4 DFIs. There are other projects that we're exploring right now with other DFIs, and it's like 6 or 7 institutions really coming together to say, how can we piecemeal all of our financing tools to really bolster manufacturing capacity and support what's needed, again, not just for today, which is incredibly important, but we're thinking about pandemic preparedness. So how do we ensure success today and long-term success so that we're not in this position, 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is DFC looking at any other manufacturers on the African continent to work with moving forward?
Absolutely. We have several, institutions that we are, speaking with right now and exploring potential opportunities. We had a lovely visit when we were in South Africa and visiting a couple of manufacturers as well. And I think that it's just a matter of figuring out, again, what is the right tool for what's needed. It could be in some instances that in this case for Aspen, what was really needed, just given the maturity of their portfolio of work at this space, that working capital is what was really needed. In other instances, it may be technical assistance and really grant funding that's required at the initial stage because of where they are, and the project may just be much more nascent. Again, I think that the DFIs are thinking about how is it that we invest in capabilities, but that we don't, sort of be in this position where I think that we saw with the flu pandemic many years ago, where you've got a lot of capacity that's created that's sitting idle. And so we really need to be intentional and thoughtful and working with partners like MedAccess, like Gavi, like WHO and Gates to say, what are the opportunities for us to, again, decentralize vaccine manufacturing, but ensure success in the mid to long term as well. That's much more of our, at least for DFC, much more of what our interest is in right now.
Okay, great. And Michael, on the same vein, if you could talk a little bit about what you think are some of the ways that innovative financing can support development of stronger vaccine manufacturing sectors on the African continent.
Well, I'd start by welcoming the work that Nafisa's led. I think it's been really important. And there are some other, we've seen some of the DFIs, multilateral step up to the challenge. To be honest, it should have happened earlier. We're coming to this rather late, but we're seeing some of the transitions that had happened in India 20, 30 years ago with the growth of vaccine manufacturing there. I think some of the same challenges are going to be present in Africa in the coming years. I think what has really changed, the critical change, is a recognition that we need to have more resilient supply chains. The vaccine nationalism that prevented the supply of vaccines to low-income countries and middle-income countries, especially in Africa, over the last year is tragic, and we ought to be ashamed and shocked with what has happened, and we cannot allow that to happen again. We do need a system that is, as Nafisa says, resilient. So part of that story is just traditional equity and debt finance, either directly into companies or structured through project finance. It can be done either way. And our parent companies, the CDC Group, which is sort of the UK equivalent of Nafisa's organization, has done a fair amount of that over the years. But I think when we're working with vaccine manufacturing particularly, there are special challenges. Vaccine manufacturing is particularly sensitive to skills. Technology transfer is essential. Quality control is really important. Forward and backward linkages for supplies and for distribution are really important. It is a difficult business to engage in. So there's potentially some role for grant finance in terms of project preparation, market analysis, technical assistance. I think this is a place where grant finance can make a big difference, because pure commercial operations are a little bit more difficult, especially at the start.
Yeah.
We need to see really strong support for know-how and show-how. The kind of work that my organization, MedAccess, does, and we can talk about this a bit more, we provide working capital and CapEx loans, but we also provide guarantees. So we can provide guarantees for loans, but what we do that is probably unusual is we provide volume guarantees for offtake to help ensure that there is a secured and predictable set of sales in coming years. And that kind of volume guarantee helps the company to make predictions and to invest and to have a stable, diversified portfolio of sales. And that's, we think, is a really important component. We've been working with 4 different propositions across the African continent on different kinds of vaccine manufacturing. When we look at vaccine manufacturing in Africa in the coming period, we need to beware that we don't put all of our eggs in the COVID basket, because there's a real potential that a year from now, the world will be engaged in oversupplying COVID vaccines. So it's really, really important that we're building sustainable businesses that have multiple vaccines with multiple channels, and that we're looking for vaccine manufacturing that isn't just supplying for African regions, but more broadly across the continent, and potentially to global markets like those run by Gavi as well.
And can you give us a little bit more information on how those volume guarantees work and why they're so effective?
Well, so the way they work is there's a general problem with many health markets, that people who manufacture and sell products really don't have enough visibility into future demand, and they don't have enough understanding. Also, the markets are often perceived to be risky and difficult, and that leads to caution in terms of investing in intermediate goods and manufacturing capacity and future planning. So what we are able to do is we go around and we do lots of demand forecasting. We talk to all of the major purchasing entities who may be purchasing a vaccine, and we understand exactly what the parameters are in terms of what low and high demand might be, and we help build up a picture of where are the main markets, what's the demand likely to be like over the next few years. And then we also help companies to find the right kind of price, so that the affordability of vaccines means that they will be purchased in larger amounts. We then contract with the company, and we provide them with guaranteed offtake, so that if sales fall below a certain level, then we provide them with compensation. And that helps give them the confidence to invest. Now, we've done a number of these guarantees in a range of different areas. The most important vaccine one we've done recently was with a joint agreement with Gavi and GSK, for the new malaria vaccine, which has just been approved by the WHO and just been recommended and is likely to be rolled out after a Gavi decision later this year. So now that was a situation where there was not yet WHO approval for the vaccine, and there was not yet a clear decision by Gavi to fund it. So GSK faced the risk of not knowing whether it could continue with production of the antigen and keep the staff on and so on. So we stepped in and helped provide a guarantee. And we said, well, our assessment of the clinical situation, the funding situation, is this vaccine is important and it will be approved, and we will take on that risk. So our core function is helping businesses to de-risk the business of scaling up their volume and holding their prices at a reasonable level. And that's what we provide. It's entirely complementary to the kind of finance that Nafisa and others provide, because that core financing for really important things like working capital and capital investment is absolutely essential.
And Nafisa, can you kind of bounce off that and talk about how DFC is working to de-risk as well?
Sure. I was going to actually just say that as Michael was speaking, in my mind, I'm thinking this is exactly why, especially in the vaccine manufacturing space, it's critical to have all of these different components in place. And it's almost like creating the perfect recipe for a project to move forward. And it's everything from de-risking it to ensure that there are offtake agreements and volume guarantees that institutions like MedAccess and Gavi and UNICEF and others can support and provide, right? And it gives, I think, comfort to a DFI that's thinking about whether or not financing in this space makes the most sense, but it also helps us to understand what is the mid to long-term view of a CMO or CDMO that's starting off, that's either in a situation where they've got an agreement with the pharmaceutical company, but not quite a full license for that manufacturing that vaccine, or in a situation where they're trying to attract a tech transfer. And so again, we're in a situation where is it the right place for a DFI to provide financing quite yet? And really where DFC plays a role is usually in senior debt. And so this is an area where I think for us, it's been very critical to have partners at the table to have a discussion about what will this look like in a few years, because what we worry about, again, is this situation where we're only thinking about COVID-19 vaccines and not the other routine vaccines that are critically important. And to Michael's point about what we saw in India 20 to 30 years ago, it's not by chance that you're seeing growth in India in the pharma space that you're seeing right now. That was incredibly intentional, and hopefully we can take a roadmap and say, what are the things that we've learned from this, and then contextualize it for other parts of the world, including the African continent. But being able to work with other DFIs helps to de-risk, I think, some of these projects as well, because we're leveraging the different types of tools that each institution has. So in the case for CDC Group, it's been really great to see them leverage their equity, where for us, it's been really great for us to be able to either leverage our technical assistance grant authority, or debt financing in a project that someone else may not be able to put as much forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. And Nafisa, can you also talk about, DFC recently signed a deal with Biological E Limited to expand their vaccine manufacturing facility in Hyderabad, India, and expand the company's capacity to produce COVID-19 vaccines. Can you talk about that partnership? What does it involve, and what sort of outcomes are you guys expecting?
Of course. So again, we were able to go to South Africa, and we were able then to travel over to Hyderabad and see our partners at Biological E and spend some time with the CEO, Mahima Datla, and go to the facilities, and also to sign our agreement with them. It's been an incredible partnership. And I think, again, when we're thinking about, the way in which these things work really well, it's by having partners that have a long history of proven work aside from COVID-19. And, Biological E has an incredible history. And for us, even being able to invest in a project where the CEO is a woman, and it sort of speaks to our 2X initiative around gender lens investing, was really exciting for us. But Biological E has a strong portfolio of vaccines that they're already manufacturing. and they received the license. They received the agreement from Johnson & Johnson to do fill and finish and drug bulk. Our financing is going towards expanding their capacity to do fill and finish for vaccines that are approved either by the WHO EUL or by the FDA, or stringent regulatory approval process. And so they've got this Johnson & Johnson fill and finish. They're also working on their own vaccine, which has been really exciting to see in terms of them moving forward with hopefully a WHO approval for that pretty soon. But the signing, I think, for us was momentous because we're able to go not only do this, but see the facility itself and how our financing is literally increasing capacity through their manufacturing capabilities. And, again, being able to see them fill finish process for Johnson & Johnson, and then the structural opportunities that they're sort of increasing in terms of capacity at their manufacturing plant as well. So it was just really encouraging to see, and also where they plan to be in the next, again, 5 to 10 years, which is critically important when you're thinking about long-term debt.
Okay. And Michael, what can we expect for the future of healthcare funding in a world shaped by COVID-19? Kind of what indications might we draw from upcoming major replenishments, such as with CEPI and the Global Fund?
Gosh, that crystal ball gazing is a challenge. I think one comment I'd make before going on to that, which is that the kind of work that Biological E has done in the past is a really good template for what could happen in Africa in the future. Biological E is one of the companies at a time when the world's supply of pentavalent vaccine was really low. We were down to just 2 suppliers of pentavalent. Biological E stepped in with some support from the Gates Foundation and others, and they really ramped up their production of that absolutely essential vaccine. So I think that kind of template is the sort of thing we should be looking at for Africa. Turning quickly to your question, Sara, about the future, I think we do see a couple of big replenishments coming. CEPI Q2 of next year is targeting contributions of $3.5 billion. The Global Fund in Q3 of next year will be looking for their 3-year annual cycle. They'll be targeting something, I assume, $10–12 billion. So there's some big moments where the world has to step up and fund these big global pots, which are absolutely critical. And with the additional task of pandemic preparedness on our plates, is going to be a big challenge. I do think one thing we should not overlook, which is in most countries, out-of-pocket expenditure by patients and consumers is often more than half of the total health spending. And so while we're all focused on government purchases and on these big global pots, which are absolutely essential, we also need to pay attention to how do we serve the patients and consumers who are buying things out of their pocket. So, there are 2 things. One of them is more money for health. We're doing that through global replenishment. So there needs to be a real determination to get that money in place. But the second part is more health for the money. A lot of the private expenditure is it's inefficient. It's often people are paying well above the odds. We need to find ways to get evidence-based, affordable medicines and products in the hands of private consumers. And that's a big challenge, I think, for organizations like Nafisa's and like mine.
Okay, great. Well, we are almost out of time. So I wanted to ask if either of you have any kind of closing thoughts, any points that you wanted to cover that we didn't have the opportunity to cover earlier in the conversation.
I'm happy to share. I mean, I've been saying this quite often, is that global health is in a position where we're finally getting attention to, critical areas that long, I think, have been ignored. And here's the opportunity for us to make an incredible impact. So the time is now. The time is now for us to invest. The time is now for us to be creative and for us to be imaginative about what this should look like and how do we make sure that we have access to affordable quality care around the world.
I would simply add that the World Health Organization estimates that nearly 2 billion people lack reliable access to the essential medicines they need to stay healthy. And we live in a world where companies are using the best of science to produce amazing products, but they're not getting into the hands of those who need them. And that is a gap that we can all address. And Finance is part of the story. It's not all of it, but we can mobilize better with creative, smart, structured solutions to help those markets work better.
Okay, well, thank you both so very much. So as the conversation has told us, in these unprecedented times, innovative financing is helping us to work through some of these challenges, but there is still a lot ahead of us. So thanks to you both for sharing your insights on these important topics, and thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.